Plenty of good storylines in the conference to focus on as we get ready for the season. First and foremost, you have to talk about Ohio State, coming off an undefeated season at 12-0. Weren't eligible for a bowl game, remember, last year. They are this season, and there are many who feel this team, led by quarterback Braxton Miller, might just be good enough to get Urban Meyer his third national championship. Meanwhile, the team that's won the Big Ten the last 3 years has a new coach. Former Utah State head man Gerry Anderson takes over for Brett Bielema, who left for Arkansas. Anderson will try to lead the Badgers to Pasadena for the fourth straight time. Purdue has a new coach as well, Darrell Hazell replacing the fired Danny Hope. Hazell fresh off a successful tenure at Kent State. The Legends race appears to be wide open. Michigan, Nebraska, Northwestern, Michigan State, all being mentioned as potential division champs. The Huskers won it last year. They returned the school's career total offense leader in Taylor Martinez. This will be the last year of legends and leaders as the conference moves to an East-West format next season. With the addition of Rutgers and Maryland, those two will officially join the Big Ten next July 1st. Also the last season of the BCS. Remember, next year college football will move to a 4-team playoff. So guys, those some of the topics on the table as we head into this Big Ten season. I think the first one is worth discussing first here, Ohio State. And people are talking national championship. Is this a good enough team to win a national championship?
It's a good enough team to be in the hunt, and obviously first you have to be in the Big Ten championship hunt. But let's look at their schedule. Very, very manageable. They match up with all the opponents. We went there and visited Howard. I thought they were the most talented team in the Big Ten. I think they're the best team in the Big Ten. Now, some issues. Tailback. Now, Carlos Hyde, we're not sure if he's going to be available or not, but whether he's available or not, they have to have a 1,200-yard rushing tailback because they can't put all the pressure on Braxton Miller in the run game. So I think that's one issue. And the other issue is they were 6th in scoring and total defense a year ago. They replaced 7 guys this year. It's tough to win a national championship unless you have a dominant defense. So I think you have to wait for that defense to develop.
And really, you're talking about the defensive lineman, really being able to play dominant, to be able to play at a championship level. I think that's a question mark that they have to address. You mentioned the tailback. I think they have a stable of backs there that are going to be able to raise the ball. But the receivers is another group that has to step up and play well. And now they have pressure. Last year, you can make the argument there was no pressure each and every week. I know internally they put pressure on themselves to go out and try to have an undefeated season, and they were able to accomplish that. This year, you're going to have some of those external pressures that are going to come in as well when we talk about expectations, and will they be able to handle it?
You know, and a lot of people talk about, was it different last year with no pressure? My experience is, that's a major difference. Yeah. I mean, you're playing with house money. Yeah. I mean, it's much different. And now, whether Briante Dunn can come along a tailback or Rod Smith, but again, I don't think they can do it by tailback by committee. I think it has to be a dominant tailback because when you're defending an offense, if the position has 100 to 120 yards, Howard, you know this better than I do, being a running back, it's different than a guy who can gain 120, 125 yards. So it's not the position. I think they need a dominant person at tailback.
You mentioned more pressure than last year. The flip side is last year they didn't have a whole lot of motivation. I think last year when we were in this spot, part of the topic was, well, how will they handle it when they lose a game? Then what will their motivation be? As it turns out, they had the perfect solution for that. They just chose not to lose a game. Gerry Anderson, very interesting to take over a program that is at its heights in the way that Wisconsin is, 3 straight Rose Bowls, as I mentioned. What's your takeaway from seeing Gerry Anderson so far here this week?
Well, every time I hear Gerry Anderson either address his team at spring practice, address the media here at media days, he's a veteran guy. He always has an answer. He's always poised. You might not agree with his answer, but to me, he reeks with being a veteran coach and a perfect hire for Wisconsin.
You know, I'll go back to the day he was hired. I said he's going to win a lot of families and players over when he walks into the living room. And that's the way he looks when he's at the podium. He knows exactly what he wants, the message he wants to get across. And I really like what they're doing there and anxious to see just how they're going to handle some of the new offense and some of the new nuances that they put in.
Yeah, what do you expect to see based on spring practice, based on what we've heard to this point? What are you looking at from this team?
Well, I didn't get an opportunity to see them this spring, but I know they got quality running backs. No question about that. That's what they want to do. That's who they are. Now, whether they throw the ball more, I think that's something that they need to do. But then if they do that, Aberdare, Pedersen, they need to find some other players that can also step up and be able to contribute. Pedersen's one of the best tight ends in the country, but he's going to need some help outside.
And I'd say this, I was at spring practice, and Andy Ludwig, the offensive coordinator, you talk about a veteran guy. I mean, he's He's one of the leading strategists in the country. He's a West Coast guy. But the other interesting thing, Howard, is they went to a 30 defense in the spring. And the 30 defense is covering the center and covering the 2 offensive tackles with defensive linemen. And a lot of people believe that's the best front to defend spread teams. You can make more adjustments because you have 4 linebackers instead of 3. So not only are they going to maybe throw it more offensively, but the defense is going through what it looks like to be a dramatic change.
It's going to be fascinating to see. Again, the formula has been such a good one in Madison. You pound the ball with the big offensive line and the great running backs, and you play very good defense. People don't give them credit for how good this defense has been over the last few years. The Legends race, as I mentioned, is wide open. 3, maybe 4 teams in that conversation. What do you think ultimately sways it?
Well, I think obviously schedule. I think quarterback play is going to be key no matter what. To me, in my mind, that's what's going to rise to the occasion, and be able to play solid defense, to me, is going to be the difference. And Coach, I know you get into the schedule and the crossover games, but to me, quarterback play is important, and not being able to turn the football over is what's ultimately going to decide the champion in that division.
Yeah, I mean, quarterback play is big. I mean, I look at 3 teams being contenders. I look at Michigan, Devin Gardner, but there's no one behind him. I look at Northwestern, Kane Coulter is as good as there is. You look at Nebraska as another contender, 4-year starter, Taylor Martinez. I think the schedule plays big time, Howard. I look at Northwestern's schedule. Their crossovers are Wisconsin, Ohio State, and rival Illinois. Of the 3 contenders, or the 3 people I think are contenders, that's the toughest crossover schedule.
But you know one thing about Northwestern, and we've seen this over the 7 years that we've had the great chance to cover them, they can go on the road and do whatever they need to do, game plan-wise, offensively. And this is a team that's gotten drastically better, in my opinion, particularly on the back half of that defense. They're more athletic and a much faster team.
And this is a little bit of an overused saying, but could be a better team with not as good a record. You know, and that's the situation they're in. I mean, this is a legitimate team, but in crossover, in 2 division leagues now, crossovers play a critical part in the equation, and Northwestern they may not have hit it the best way this year with their crossovers.
No, a little bit easier last year, although remember they lost one of the crossover games last year. They did fall to Penn State. Finally, among the teams that maybe people aren't talking about as being contenders to win a division, who do you think could rise up and have a good year, Howard?
Well, I know the team that I've been looking at has been Indiana, and that's really because I know what the philosophy is going in. They're going to play. They're going to move the ball offensively. They're going to throw it around. They have to make a decision at the quarterback position. They have already acknowledged they have to get drastically better on defense, but I think they have one of the most underrated offensive lines, and they're going to be able to move the ball. I mean, this is a team that put 63 on Ohio State, so they're going to move the ball against whoever they're playing. They just can't turn it over as well.
You know, I thought Kevin Wilson was the most impressive coach yesterday at Media Day because his message is so clear. It's the same message every time. Dynamic on offense, especially at quarterback. Continued improvement on defense through recruiting. Now, I think the biggest question in Indiana, I go back to the schedule, okay? Indiana State, Bowling Green, they match up with. Missouri, tough one. Navy, remember last year against Navy? A very difficult offense to stop.
Right.
So how many of those 4 do they win? They can match up with Illinois and Purdue in the leaders, and then their crossovers. At Michigan State, that's tough, and Minnesota at home. And you guys know this, the Minnesota-Indiana game is as important to Minnesota as it is to Indiana. That's maybe our first Super Bowl of 2013. Both those teams better play like it's a Super Bowl. So I think schedule's critical for Indiana.
But you mentioned it just a little while ago when you were talking about this is a team that probably will be better, but their record will not indicate it. You go back to Michigan last year, at 8-5, they were unsatisfied with that, unacceptable. This Indiana team could have not as good a record as we would like or they would like, but they're still going to be a better team.
Or they could be bowl eligible. I mean,
you never know.
I think they're knocking on that door.
I do
Absolutely.
too.
I mean, they certainly, offensively, that's one of the elite teams in the league. The question is, can they just be functional on defense? That's something we'll talk about with Kevin Wilson a little bit later in our show.